Greetings, comrades, and we are going to do something a little bit different today. Today, I'm going to break apart the larger episode and do my current events segment first, and hopefully that'll come out initially here on Thursday with the larger show coming out on Friday. The reason being is that I really want to talk about the Turkish election, and I don't want that segment to bog down the show tomorrow. So I've created this 10 to 15 minute segment to cover the Turkish election. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the major players. I'm going to talk about what happened on Sunday and what is going to happen in the future. Without further ado, I'm going to get right into this. And we're going to start off by doing a very quick recap of the major players. The first one we're going to start with is current incumbent President Erdogan. Erdogan leads the Justice and Development Party. It's abbreviated as the AK Party. I'm assuming that is the Turkish letters. I'm not sure how to pronounce it in Turkish, and I'm not even going to try. So he has been leading Turkey for almost 20 years, or maybe more than 20 years at this point. I think it's almost 20 years. That being said, he has pretty much led Turkey during the entirety of the 21st century, making him a very prominent figure in Turkish politics. And obviously, he's shaped Turkish society for many, many years now. And he's looking for his opportunity to leave his final mark because at this, I don't want to speculate too much, but I would imagine most likely this is going to be his final term if he does win. And that will give him the opportunity to tie up any loose ends in his tenure as Turkish president now. So let's dive into his party here. Right now, he leads currently on the presidential level. He leads a large conglomerate of parties called the People's Alliance, in which his party, the Justice and Development Party, is the main head party of the leader of this coalition. This is a right-leaning coalition. As with pretty much all the countries in the Eastern Mediterranean, there isn't really a left that exists in many of these countries' political spheres. And in Turkey, the main predominant party is a center-right party. You can say some people would even argue right-wing or far-right, graded on a curve in comparison to maybe our conceptions of political parties. Yes, they are much more right-leaning. However, in their own jurisdiction and in their own geography, they're more of a center-right force. But ultimately, though, this political movement and this political coalition does represent Erdogan, and Erdogan certainly has his own political brand all over the People's Alliance. And what's interesting, to me at least, as an outside observer looking at Erdogan's politics, I see Turkey as a country with many opportunities and simultaneously reaching out in many different directions to see which one is the best. So it's almost like he's got more of a blank slate and a lot of opportunity to write things himself. And that's what he has been doing, which makes his actual politics pretty inconsistent over the last 20 years in which he has served. And during such a long time in office, you certainly don't serve that long without gaining some enemies. And this particular election has been the first time in which a large coalition of Erdogan's enemies have come together and really made a huge effort and a real concerted effort in overthrowing him and replacing his rule. And the leader of that particular coalition is a gentleman by the name of Kemal. Okay, so I've actually heard Kılıçdaroğlu's name pronounced a couple different ways. I've heard Kılıçdaroğlu and Kılıçdaroğlu and a bunch of different names. Personally, I'm going to go with Kılıçdaroğlu for two reasons. A, it's more fun to say, and B, it sounds like a Mortal Kombat character or something. Kılıçdaroğlu. In my head, I imagine that at the at the character select screen, it's like just this picture of him, and he looks exactly the same in the game. Just this like feeble 74-year-old Turkish man, but he's like throwing those like classic Mortal Kombat uppercuts and like ripping out spines. Anyway, now that I've got that image in your head, let's talk about Kılıçdaroğlu and what his politics are and what he represents for Turkey. Unfortunately, he did not have the opportunity to rip out any spines on Sunday. Kılıçdaroğlu is an interesting politician in the sense that he represents a real kind of like coalition maker. He's been around for a long time. He's even older than Erdogan, which makes the idea that even if he did get elected, he'd be destined to be a caretaker if he wins, but at least he'd be able to set the direction that Turkey will go in into the future. So what he has done effectively is really taken a lot of parties that have a lot of differing politics and really shouldn't be together in one coalition, and kind of push them all together into this massive anti-Erdogan coalition. So he's got this like raucous group of parties underneath his own coalition, which is called the National Alliance, which again, it represents a wide variety of political interests. But the one thing these people will agree on is that they want Erdogan out and they want to get rid of him. Kılıçdaroğlu has used his political capital to finesse together this National Alliance coalition and really make the best run at Erdogan that we've seen pretty much ever, at least in his tenure as a Turkish president. When you consider this party in comparison, especially to North American parties, they are a centrist party, definitely not a left-wing party. However, in comparison to the area that they're in the Eastern Mediterranean, they are definitely more of a left-wing party. They represent a coalition of Kurdish people, younger Turks, younger Turkish people who've moved internationally, a lot of people in urban centers and coastal centers, right? A lot more what you would consider a left-leaning coalition. So very interesting. I think Kılıçdaroğlu is an interesting politician in the sense that he has been able to really build a large coalition and take on Erdogan. However, it doesn't seem like what he's been doing has been enough. But before we get into the results, let us briefly talk about the last player, and we're not going to spend too much time on the last player because he got knocked out on Sunday. This is Sinan Ogan. Sorry, again, my pronunciation, not the best. Not really familiar with this guy so much on a personal level. On a political level, he's pretty right-wing. He's probably even more right-wing than Erdogan. In fact, he used to be an Erdogan ally, but a schism between the two men led him to effectively go his own way and start his own party, which we will look at right here. He leads the Astral Alliance, which is an alliance of very ultra-nationalist elements within Turkish society, and very, 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 even like they would be considered far right for us, and they would definitely be considered right-wing in their own region. So a far-right coalition, parties which did better than most people expected on Sunday. And with that, let's jump into some of the results that we saw on Sunday and break down everything. We've got Al Jazeera. This was one of the various places I was following during the actual election itself. During the actual election itself, it was very confusing because I was getting like different results and hearing all kinds of crazy allegations and accusations. For example, the two main Turkish news agencies had different results for the majority of the tabulation. And I'm like, I'm thinking, what the hell's going on? Why do we have two different results? And over time, they started to coincide with one another. And the reason for this is apparently they have two different ways of tabulating the vote and counting the vote. And the fact at the end of the day that they showed that they had similar results, even though they used these two different counting methods, shows that this election was probably an election with integrity, not too much in the ways of shenanigans going on, although there are some objections that we'll talk about. But let's talk about the results as we see them right now. Erdogan just falling below the 50% mark that he would need to outright win the election. Because if you guys remember, like in the Brazilian election, you need to get 50% outright in order to win in the first round. So it's a runoff type of election that if no one achieves 50% in the first round, you're going to go to the second round, in which will be the top two candidates facing off against each other. And that is exactly what is going to happen at the end of May. So the main thing here is that Erdogan did pretty well. He did almost as well as he could have hoped. Obviously, he probably hoped to win in the first round, but he was stopped just short of that. And Kılıçdaroğlu significantly underperformed in the polls. It looked like he may even outright win in the first round. However, he got only about 45%, which leaves him a substantial gap to fill out going into the second round. And moving on, we also see Ogden did very well in his Ancestral Alliance, outshined the polls as well, getting around 5%, which shows, again, as we talked about, these people probably have more in line from a political sense with Erdogan than Kılıçdaroğlu. Moving into the second round, where these people are going to go is certainly a major question, but considering that Erdogan is more politically aligned with them, it stands to reason that they would move towards Erdogan's camp. However, it doesn't always work that way. For example, in the Brazilian election, we saw that Lula came very, very close to outright winning in the second round, or excuse me, in the first round. And then in the second round, he almost lost. It was very, very close. He only won with 52%, just squeaked over the finish line. Anything can happen, especially in the second round, especially in a country where, unlike Brazil, Turkey is not a country which has mandatory voting. They do have an extremely high participation rate. It looks like the participation rate for this election was around 90%. Crazy. That's crazy for a non-enforced mandatory voting. 90% participation rate is huge. So, long story short, Kılıçdaroğlu has a lot of ground to make up in the second round election. So let's move over here to a large map of the election results based on province. And what I think this is interesting, what's interesting here is what we have a pretty classic sort of cultural divide in the country here. Actually, you know what? I'll just move myself. There we go. That makes more sense. In any case, we have a very clear divide here in Turkey. And if you talk to Turkish people, they will pretty much verify this, and they'll talk about this divide, is that you have a divide really along the coastal population that tends to be more secular, that tends to be more liberal, tends to be younger, more left-leaning. Then you have the rural populations, which, as is the case almost everywhere, tend to be more conservative. And then, of course, in the far east there, you have the Kurdish provinces, which were some of the provinces hardest hit by the earthquakes. Those were going to go against Erdogan anyway. They always go against Erdogan. But the earthquakes definitely helped increase the vote margin for Kılıçdaroğlu in those regions. However, some of the regions which were hit by the earthquake, as you can see in the south of Turkey there, still voted for Erdogan, which is it's pretty wild. And then beyond, you also have a clear urban-rural divide as well. You can see that Kılıçdaroğlu for the first time was able to unseat Erdogan in Istanbul, the largest and, I guess, cultural center of Turkey. Then you have the actual capital of Ankara, which also went for Kılıçdaroğlu. Two important wins for him there, but obviously it wasn't enough to beat out all the rural voters which came in support of Erdogan. And another division, and this is one of the objections which was brought up during the election, is a division between sort of international Turkish people and people who remain in the country. One of the things, I've genuinely never met a Turkish person who lives here in North America that has anything nice to say about Erdogan ever. They all shit talk him. They all hate him. They can't stand his guts. Like I said, never heard anybody over here in North America that is from Turkey say a good word about the guy. But obviously those people can still vote in the presidential elections. One of the things that Ogden complained about was the international Turkish vote was not being counted properly. It stands to reason that probably very heavily favors Kılıçdaroğlu, and he would obviously not get very many votes, I think, from the international Turkish coalition of voters. So he brings up objections to try and tamper with and soften that aspect of the vote. And then for objections on Kılıçdaroğlu's side, he was saying for a very long time and during the election tabulation that he was ahead and that his own internal counters had him ahead. And what was happening is that in areas where he was leading, is that polling workers for Erdogan's party would object to ballot boxes that were most likely going to be in favor of Kılıçdaroğlu, essentially gumming up the processes. Apparently, they were complaining that a lot of these ballot boxes were being objected to maliciously 8, 9, 10 times for no reason, and that would hold up the count. Would that be enough to make up the difference here? Probably not. That being said, that is a pretty disturbing allegation, and if that is the case, A, hopefully they can counteract it, and B, going into the runoff election at the end of May here, Obviously, Kılıçdaroğlu's coalition is going to know that Erdogan is probably going to play dirty. Now, with all that said and done, where does that leave us? That leaves us waiting in anticipation with the second round vote on the 28th. Obviously, something we'll be talking about. It will be between exclusively Erdogan and Kılıçdaroğlu, and obviously, I would say that Erdogan is the favorite in this circumstance. He very narrowly missed outright winning in the first round last time, defying the polls, defying the odds, and the coalition which really defied him getting that 50% is most likely going to come out and vote for him. However, not guaranteed. Because the thing is, right, these people who voted for Ogan had the opportunity to vote for Erdogan. They had the opportunity to vote for him for the first time, and they didn't for a reason. And a lot of these people either A, are maybe they might hate vote for Kılıçdaroğlu. That usually doesn't happen. It can sometimes happen. Or more likely, they would stay home and just not vote in the second round, which I would say is much more likely. That being said, that still probably favors Erdogan in the end. So if you're a betting man, you definitely bet on Erdogan taking it, unfortunately, in my opinion, in the second round. That being said, anything can happen in these 2 weeks. Erdogan could get sick, the economy could collapse, some sort of crisis or ethnic tension could uprise, or another earthquake could happen. Who knows, right? Who knows what can happen in these 2 weeks? But barring something unforeseen happening, it seems very likely that Erdogan is going to win. That being said, we are going to be covering it as we move closer to the second round. That's going to bring us to the end of our crash course on the Turkish election. Obviously, there is more to come at the end of the month here, so we've only just finished the first round. But let me leave you with my personal favorite picture to emerge from the Turkish election on Sunday. I just love this guy. He probably did not vote for a party that I would politically align with, but I think it's hilarious. Like, who has this, right? He's got the horse, right? And he's got the getup and the flag and the hat. And he's, you know what? This is it. This is the time. I've been waiting to bust this out. And off I go, off to the polls. In any case, that made me laugh. With that, I want to thank you guys for watching. This has been Comrade signing off for now, and we will be back in round 2.